Welcome back, everyone. This is Jeffrey Geisner for the Obligations of Memory podcast network for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. We're here on episode 3 with Jenna Zark and her cousins Brian and Dina. And we're going to now really focus on Dina's book. Before I get started, I want to let you know that Jenna is an award-winning author and playwright. Her columns for the Minneapolis Twin Cities Jew folk were the basis for the Crooked Lines and frequently went viral at sites around the country. Jenna is also an author of 2 middle school grade books, The Beat and Ruby's Street and The Fool's Errand. So the latter books that are school age books is very different. So what possessed you to go and decide to write a very different book called Crooked Lines? And I'll have you, in your words, tell the audience what it's about.
Well, it's called Crooked Lines, A Single Mom's Jewish Journey. And it was created because I had parted company with the life I had been living unexpectedly and began to look at how I wanted to live afterwards. I had been married to a cantor and living more of a life that was involved with clergy and the synagogue. And when unexpectedly that ended, I had to decide how I was going to work with my co-parent to raise my son Jewishly and how I wanted to do that. Having grown up where I had gone to a Jewish day school with a very strong tradition of Jewish holidays and rituals, I had my own notions about how I wanted to proceed. But the last thing I expected was to be a single mom. And the other thing that I found was that loving our Jewish community as I do, I also can say that it is sometimes more comfortable for people who are in traditional families than people who are not, people who may be single parents, people who may be in non-traditional relationships. So when TC Jew Folk editor Leora Maccabee, who's really one of my just an old family friend, called, and she asked if I wanted to write something Jewishly inclined for TC Jew Folk, which was just starting in 2009. I said, well, I thought to myself, no, but I said yes. And I think I said yes because it intrigued me. And I thought maybe I could bring a different point of view to families or to people reading this, that maybe you don't have to be in a traditional family to have a strong Jewish connection. And that was what spurred me on. When I started writing those columns, I wanted to direct them to single parents, whether dads, moms, and I wanted them to know they were welcome at the table. But of course, I had no standing to say any of that. I'm not a rabbi or a cantor or anything like that. But then I thought, well, maybe you do have standing because you're not, because you are just one other person in this community. How does this feel to you? And knowing that I had friends who said, well, I'm turned off, or I feel turned away, or I don't feel connected. And I thought, but maybe there is a connection and we're not being told about it. We're not understanding it. So that was how I started. And then when the pandemic happened and I couldn't really go anywhere, I thought, well, maybe, I started looking at the columns, and I had long thought about marrying them into a book. And then I started thinking maybe this was a good time to do that. And then, of course, I had to go through everything look at each chapter, figure out how fit into the next chapter, and then write some brand new chapters and figure it out.
How many
And
columns?
that's,
How many columns did you write?
let's see here. I wrote some brand new ones. So there are ones that are not formally written, but altogether there are 55 chapters. And
is a
some of them are
column
brand new.
is a column a chapter, or there's multiple?
Yes, they're columns, but I've been developing them into
Okay.
chapters.
I see. So one TC Jewfolk blog is equal to a chapter plus add-ons.
Right, right.
The reason I'm interested for myself, as well as I know in the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance group diaspora, there's a lot of people who have family stories. There's a lot of people who are writers. There are published writers, and there are a lot of people who are wannabe writers. And so every time I get the opportunity to talk to an author who's published, I want to make sure that we pay it forward a little bit and help those who are sitting and listening and wanting to figure out how to write their unique story, that we help them. So we'll be asking some questions down that pathway. So when you first published the several articles, and how do you write them monthly?
Well, when I was working on this originally in 2010 and 2009 for a number of years, I'm trying to think how often. I think it might have been, it was every time there was a holiday. And then after a while, it was for rituals too. So, and it was probably over the period of 2-3 years where the first part of it stuck to being a single mom. The second part of it went into an intermarriage. And the third part of it was about my parents. And each of those sections, there are really 3 sections, are through the lens of Jewish holidays or rituals.
So can I ask you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a title or two of a chapter that you can tell us that comes out of each of those 3 components?
Certainly. And I could read a piece here and there
Sure.
if you
That'd be
wanted.
great. That'd be awesome.
So the first part is, let's see, that part, let me see if I can find something sort of fun. Single mom seeks mezuzah. So this was about moving out of the home that I'd lived in for a while, and whether or not to get, I didn't have any mezuzahs because the place that I was leaving obviously was keeping them. And I met a very Orthodox friend at the JCC who said, do you have mezuzahs? And so I told her I was moving. And I said I hadn't thought much about it. And she said, I'll read a little. When people don't have good mezuzahs, it's a problem. In fact, it's the reason there's so much trouble in the world. I looked at her and she looked back at me. And I realized she was quite serious. Though normally I might have nodded politely and talked of something else, the idea of a mezuzah protecting me from all the trouble in the world rang true. Because you're not only leaving home when you leave a marriage, you're leaving everything you thought was right about your life. And so I ended up getting, someone gave me a present for one mezuzah, and one I bought actually from the Chabad group. And her husband expected them both. And of course, he looked at them both and he said, the one from our group is kosher, the other one isn't. And I didn't know what to do at that point. So here I write, I sighed, not wanting to give up my ornate mezuzah. Could I get another kosher one and keep the pretty one, I thought. Maybe on a doorway underneath the kosher one. In the end, that's what I did. And I must tell you, throughout the year or two we lived at that apartment, I skirted no end of trouble, from carpal tunnel to money troubles to a heat breakdown amid winter and all kinds of things in between. When we moved to our new house, I brought all the mezuzahs with me and got some new ones. I haven't seen my Orthodox friend lately, but if I do, I'll tell her I'm doing my part to keep all the trouble out. And on nights when things feel scary and I think those monsters are surfacing again, I still reach up to touch those mezuzahs more than you think.
So we're going to come back to another reading in a little bit, but when you started to produce and publish these TC Jewfolk articles, what was the audience reaction to you and the commenting? And did you get letters or emails from people? Can you speak to that a little bit? Were they resonating with people? Were you connecting to a new community?
I was. The group were people under 40 that were most of the TC Jewfolk audience, at least when it began, probably currently too. And I was hearing so much resonance. People who were single, people who didn't know how they felt about being connected to a synagogue, people who were going through relationships with people that weren't Jewish, people who didn't know whether they could celebrate a Jewish holiday or not. There was so much support and I got so many comments and I was so excited to have that happen.
That's beautiful. So now I want to take you all the way to the end. So you worked how many years did you work on the book?
Well, I had a few years where I was doing the columns, and then I started revising it and turning it into a book during the pandemic. So between 2020 and the very, and probably most of 2020 and then till mid 2021.
Okay. But you started in what year did you start writing your column?
I started writing the columns in 2009.
Yeah. So were you self-published or did you find a publisher for the book?
I found a publisher. I had an agent I was working with. Okay. She sent it out to various publishers. And we heard about a year ago from Kohler Books. They are a hybrid publisher, so they do a certain amount of publishing traditionally, and some where people are self-publishing through them. And for me, they said they wanted to offer me a traditional publishing contract where I was given an advance. And that's what happened. I was very happy to receive that offer.
So when you finally got the FedEx delivery of the carton of books that came to your porch, probably maybe it was signed or not signed, what was the feeling that you had to receive and take the box knife and open up the box and see your book in front of you?
Well, the first thing I thought was, this is really heavy and I'm going to have my husband lift it because there's no way that I'm going to be able to do that. And just pulling it out and seeing, they did a really beautiful job. I'll just show you very quickly. It was very thrilling to get the cover.
So that's you and Josh on the cover?
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the picture in the bottom corner where your finger is?
So it's kind of broken up into different pieces. So there's hands there. There's a menorah. There's my sweater. There's a cup. So there's different Jewish and non-Jewish, body part related hands or a sweater, but Jewish objects.
What does the sweater mean? And what does the hands mean?
Well, it's really just that she kind of broke up the picture of me and Josh.
Oh,
So I had the sweater and the hands.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it's like crooked lines. Like she broke it into a lot of different crooked pieces.
Yeah. So again, when you opened up the box and saw it, what was the first impression what was the first thing you said?
I thought, I wasn't going to do this. It might have been crazy, but I'm really glad I did. And just that, when you have something in your head for a long time and then you bring it to life.
That's beautiful. It's a creation.
Yeah.
The book is actually called Crooked Lines. It's by Jenna Zark. It's available on Amazon. So I want to go back now all the way to the beginning. You've been writing this book since 2009. So I don't know what process of research that you put into each one of your articles, but can you describe that briefly?
Well, I had to research every Jewish holiday I was writing about and every ritual, because even though there were my personal stories and how I intersected, I didn't want to be wrong about the Jewish holidays, and tried to go to My Jewish Learning, Chabad, as many different sites as I could to find out different explanations of the Jewish holidays. Brian is probably much more learned than me about Brian and all his synagogues and the holidays to a degree. But
so we'll take you into the idea of writing. A lot of people who I interview have many different forms of how they get to the end zone. So how would you describe your writing style?
I try to do it in the morning when I'm most awake and most on my feet. I think there are times though where I'm walking around or I'm talking to someone or I'm cleaning the house or whatever it is, and I think, oh my God, I've got to write that down. And so I try to have a notebook, or even in bed, and I've woken up in the middle of the night, tried to run out to the bathroom so I don't bug my husband, and write things down as they occur to me. But I try to write, I'm, certainly when I'm not working, that might be a little bit when I come home. I wish I could get up early, super early in the morning, but I can't. I have a friend that does that and I admire her. But then on the days that I'm not at work, I'm writing a few hours a day. And then I think there comes a point where you can write so long at your desk that you're not going to get anywhere.
Now,
and you have to stop.
Do you just write, or do you edit yourself as you write?
I will edit as I write, but generally what I'll do is write something, it's a first draft or a second draft or a third draft, go away, take a walk, do something else, come back and go, oh my God, what was I thinking? And then start re-editing and fixing it up.
Okay. And your idea, how did you decide that you wanted to get an agent? That is, I have found from talking to many authors, it's extremely difficult to find an agent. So is that because you have a background in the arts, that you're a playwright and you have connections? How do you piece together and get an agent?
Well, I had an agent for the middle grade books. She actually was not able to place it. And then I found another publisher that was interested in doing it. In terms of this book, I was going to get in touch with that agent just to see if there were possibilities there or try another agent. The reason I decided to go with an agent is because I am so busy. I have a part-time job and there's just so much going on.
What is your part-time job?
I work as a writer.
Oh,
So I work writing for a group that provides housing and healthcare and community services to older adults called Cassia.
based in Minneapolis or
Yes,
virtual? Okay.
Minneapolis.
Mhm.
And then, so then it was really necessity that I thought, I need someone to help me get this in front of publishers. I don't have time. And I had a good friend who I wrote about years ago as a magazine writer. She is an author who wrote about living in a haunted house for 25 years. She's not Jewish, but she's no buts. She's not Jewish. She's an amazing writer. Her pen name is Annie Wilder. And I loved her book. And later she became a book agent. And because we stayed friends, I knew about it. So I was telling her about the book, and she offered to be the agent for the book. And I was really thrilled because I know her well. Her integrity is outstanding. Her work is outstanding. So we talked about how to position the book. She helped me put together a tip sheet, and then she went ahead and made the submissions.
Okay.
And
So I wanted to ask Dina and Brian to comment on your impressions of the book.
I don't know if they've read much of it yet.
We haven't really read the book yet, but
Oh, I'm catching you. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay. Because it's very new. It just came out.
When did it come out? When did it publish?
September 5th.
Oh, wow. Well, am I one of your first interviews then? So, okay, so we're getting close to our end of our last episode. So I wanted to turn it off back to you, Jenna, and ask you, since it's published, you have a following from the writing that you've done on TC Jew Folk. That I think they promoted it there, and maybe that's how I connected to you, through TC Jew Folk, if I remember correctly. So what has been the reaction of the book?
Well, so far I've heard from different people that they're very excited to buy it and to read it. I had a podcast that was released September 5th that if you go to the TC Jew Folk site, you can listen to. I've had a lot of friends kindly, say, we're buying the book, we're going to read it, we can't wait. And I've had reviewers, I've had people over at Kohler Books, other authors who are not Jewish tell me that they related to it or they enjoyed it, which was also great to hear. So I am, I'm excited about the reaction so far.
I would want everyone to also hear your story and to read your book. It's called Crooked Lines. It's available on Amazon. And I would like to end our episode by you reading another passage that you can pick, like you did before, because I think it was beautiful. And that's a great way to exit out of our interview.
Let's see, I'm going to try to see if I can find something else fun.
Maybe it doesn't have to be fun. Maybe it can be more reality based.
There is, by the way, a piece about my father dying and performing the Hever Kadisha for him. I wasn't, but being able to get that done for him, and why. I don't know if you want to hear a little bit of that.
Sure, go ahead, please.
So let me see. That's kind of an interesting chapter. That is, the Hever Kadisha is a ritual that is not performed a whole lot. Let's see, it's called Son of the Faith. So let me read you just a little bit of that. and it might be of interest to you. It was about my decision to give my father a traditional Jewish burial. Son of the faith. He was gone. I was alone. I was holding his hand. In a few minutes, I would be calling the funeral director, who would ask if I wanted a Jewish burial for my father. That meant he would be given a ritual washing by members of the Sacred Burial Society, called Hevra Kadisha in Hebrew. I would have to say yes or no. My father was not even remotely religious and had not been since the rabbi at his Depression-era synagogue denied him a bar mitzvah because his family couldn't pay dues. Bar bat mitzvah literally means son, daughter of the commandments, or the faith. The ceremony is about joining the Jewish community, and Dad had always regretted missing out on it. I looked down at my father's still warm hand, trying to decide what to do. I could see him as a skinny, freckly 12-year-old, blue eyes widening as he took in the rabbi's words. My father would have been smiling because he didn't like letting people know when they heard him. He would have shrugged and nodded, quickly turning away. I tried to remember how I felt when I first heard of the Burial Society. Like many American Jews, I grew up knowing nothing of how our tradition treats the dead, and my introduction to it had not been an auspicious one. When my first husband, Mitch, first became a cantor, we moved to Hammond, Indiana from New York, where we had been struggling actors and writers. He started his first job at a Hammond synagogue, and I began to write plays. Mitch joined the Burial Society almost immediately, which came as a shock to me. He described it almost offhandedly as a group of special people who take care of the dead by washing and dressing them. The washing, called tahara in Hebrew, has been performed since ancient times in Jewish communities. It sounded weird and a little frightening because beyond seeing one non-Jewish friend in his coffin, I had never been close to death. I wasn't sure how to react and asked him why he was joining. Because he had never been in a war or had other intense life and death encounters, he thought joining the society would be an important experience for someone starting a career in the clergy. He also believed the society was a group willing to do what no one else would, and that intrigued him. I thought he was nuts. My mother and friends also thought he was nuts, but how could I tell him that? When I pressed for more details, he said he had something to show me. Instead of taking me to a funeral home, he brought me to a hair salon, where to my surprise, he introduced me to the owner, who shook my hand and offered me a free haircut. I watched her as she pumped my seat and placed her scissors out on the counter. Her name was Nancy. She was a member of Mitch's congregation. She was close to my age, in her late 20s, with a fountain of long curly hair, tight black leather pants, and long red nails. I heard your husband is a member of the Hevra Kadisha, she said, as she lifted my hair while grinning into the mirror. Then she leaned over and whispered, "Me too." I looked up at her as she smiled. Those slender white fingers with perfectly polished nails were going out at night and washing dead people. What's more, they were people Nancy knew. As she started cutting and layering, I knew I had to learn more.
Wow, very good. And I'm going to let that sink in. And I'm going to invite Dina and Brian to have the last words. They've been a participant, actor and actress in this active interview. So why don't you exit us out of this interview, both of you?
very enlightening. And there are stories that I didn't know. And thank you, Jenna, for sharing them.
Yes, it sure did open up a whole new world, and I have my order going through right now. So we'll be getting the book probably in a day or two. So,
Terrific.
Thank you.
thank you for that.
Thank
Well,
you.
I want to thank all of our audience for listening to the podcast of Jenna Zark and her book, Crooked Lines, along with her cousins, Brian and Dina. You're listening to Jeffrey Geisner from the Obligations of Memory Podcast Network for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. And we'll see you again on our next interview. Bye now.